In a show of unity in Ukraine on Saturday, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz were among leaders from 4 major European countries pushing for a 30-day Ukraine-Russia ceasefire starting Monday. According to Associated Press, the leaders, from France, the United Kingdom, Germany and Poland said in Kiev that the proposal to start the ceasefire on Monday was supported by US President Donald Trump, whom they had briefed over the phone earlier in the day. The demand was announced in a joint press conference with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and countries leading the so-called Coalition of the Willing, a group of over 30 countries who have pledged to strengthen Ukraine to deter Russian aggression. They included French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who on Saturday traveled to Ukraine together for the first time. During the briefing, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the leaders agreed to ramp up sanctions and increase our military aid for Ukraine's defense to pressure Russia back to the table. The ceasefire would include a halt to fighting on land, sea, and in the air. The leaders threatened to ratchet up sanctions, including on Russia's energy and banking sectors, if Putin did not comply. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stressed that, if Russia refuses this ceasefire, then we will continue to defend Ukraine and we will continue to increase the pressure on Russia. Saturday marked the last day of a unilateral 3-day ceasefire declared by Russia that Ukraine says the Kremlin's forces have repeatedly violated.
So we are clear. All 5 leaders here, all the leaders of the meeting we just had with the Coalition of the Willing, an unconditional ceasefire, rejecting Putin's conditions, and clear that if he turns his back on peace, we will respond. Working with President Trump, with all our partners, we will ramp up sanctions and increase our military aid for Ukraine's defence, to pressure Russia back to the table. We want to help Ukraine look to the future with confidence. So we're working to boost Ukraine's economy, and as a vital step, I'm pleased that UK experts have been on the ground leading work to support the resumption of flights into Ukraine once the ceasefire is achieved. It will take time, but this will be a huge moment in reconnecting Ukraine's economy, boosting investor confidence, and helping to reunite families separated by this war. There must be an unconditional ceasefire for 30 days. Clear that that means it must be without conditions, because Putin's response to the call for an unconditional ceasefire is to say, well, I could do a ceasefire, but with conditions on it. So we've been really clear today in rejecting that.
Deutlich in Aussicht gestellt, jetzt sind Sie Bundeskanzler, werden Sie da was anderes machen?
Und ich bin persönlich am Ende dieser Woche auch ein Stück bewegt, dass es mir als Bundeskanzler der Bundesrepublik Deutschland heute erlaubt ist, in diesem Kreis hier zu stehen und zusammen mit dem polnischen Ministerpräsidenten, dem britischen Premierminister und dem französischen Tatpräsidenten, unserem Freund und Partner, dem Präsidenten der Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenski, nicht nur unsere volle Solidarität und Unterstützung zum Ausdruck zu bringen, sondern in dieser schwierigen Phase eines schon seit über 3 Jahren andauernden Kriegs, an einem fast schon historischen Tag zu sagen, wir stehen fest und bleiben fest an der Seite der Ukraine.
And your question goes to?
Und wir sind dankbar, dass der amerikanische Präsident voll und ganz unsere Initiative unterstützt, sie teilt und sie mit uns auch gemeinsam ergreift. Wir arbeiten gemeinsam darauf hin, dass Russland sich endlich auf einen längeren Waffenstillstand einlässt, statt immer wieder neue Vorbedingungen zu stellen. Wir haben mit Präsident Zelenski heute darüber beraten, wie die nächsten Schritte hin zu einem echten Frieden aussehen können. Der erste Schritt muss über den Waffenstillstand des Wochenendes hinaus ein 30-tägiger Waffenstillstand ab Montag der nächsten Woche sein, der unkonditioniert von Russland eingehalten wird. Es muss klar sein, wenn Russland sich diesem Waffenstillstand verweigert, einem Waffenstillstand, der die Grundlage für sofort beginnende Verhandlungen sein kann, dann werden wir die Ukraine weiter verteidigen und wir werden den Druck auf Russland weiter erhöhen. Auch das gehört zum heutigen Tag dazu.
The leaders of 4 European countries arrived in Kiev Saturday in a joint show of support as calls intensify for Russia to agree to a month-long ceasefire in the 3-year war. According to Associated Press, the leaders of France, Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom arrived together at the train station in Kyiv, where they met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenski. Shortly afterward, they laid flowers at a makeshift flag memorial for fallen Ukrainian soldiers at Kyiv's Independence Square during a ceremony marking the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. The visit marked the first time the leaders of the 4 countries have traveled together to Ukraine, while Friedrich Merz is making his first visit to Ukraine as Germany's new Chancellor. Along with US President Donald Trump, the European leaders are pushing for Russia to agree to a 30-day ceasefire to allow for peace talks on ending the conflict. In March, the United States proposed an immediate 30-day truce in the war, which Ukraine accepted, but the Kremlin has held out for ceasefire terms more to its liking. We reiterate our backing for President Trump's calls for a peace deal and call on Russia to stop obstructing efforts to secure an enduring peace, the leaders said in a joint statement. Alongside the U.S., we call on Russia to agree a full and unconditional 30-day ceasefire to create the space for talks on a just and lasting peace. Later in the day, the leaders were expected to host a virtual meeting alongside Zelensky to update other leaders on the progress being made for a future so-called coalition of the willing that would help Ukraine's armed forces after a peace deal and potentially deploy troops to Ukraine to police any future peace agreement with Russia.
Le rapprochement avec l'Allemagne a changé quelque chose dans cette sécurité européenne qui est en train de se dessiner?
Je pense que ce qui est en train de se faire avec la Pologne, l'Allemagne, la Grande-Bretagne est un moment historique pour une Europe de la défense et une plus grande indépendance de notre sécurité. Évidemment pour l'Ukraine aujourd'hui, mais pour nous tous. C'est une nouvelle ère, c'est une Europe qui se pense comme puissance.
Monsieur le Président, est-ce que vous pensez...
Macron
Wait, stop.